Hi folks, Seth Leipson here. Thanks for watching my monologue. In these uncertain times, you may be thinking about personal protection. If you are, I urge you to visit my friends at Guns Etc. They'll help you find the perfect protection for yourself and your family, and they can even teach you how to use it. They've been protecting Arizonans for over 33 years, and they stand for the great principles this country was founded upon. Or you can just click on gunsetcetera.com. And if you like my monologues, please subscribe to 960 The Patriots YouTube channel. Welcome back and happy November 30th, 2020. Interestingly, if you can take your mind back 2 weeks, headline after headline stated the United States, Donald Trump, was considering an attack on Iran. It was odd and a bit lost due to the election contretemps, but go look. It was all there. Now, of a sudden, Israel is being alleged to have assassinated the nuclear weapons scientist par excellence in Iran. But it doesn't end there. As Scott Johnson notes, the reports for the past few days bring a new meaning to the word confusing. On November 27th, for example, the New York Post reported that Mohsen Fakhrizadeh was assassinated in an ambush. The story added that Fakhrizadeh was seriously wounded during a battle between the gunman and his bodyguards before being rushed to a nearby hospital. On November 29th, the Post reported that the assassination was carried out by a highly trained hit squad of 62 people, pouncing in 6 vehicles after the local power supply was cut. The killers included a team of 50 giving logistical support to the Dirty Dozen who carried out the actual ambush on Friday. Sources told leading Iranian journalist Mohammed Awazeh. On November 30th, the Post reported that the assassination was carried out by what an Iranian security official claims was a team of Israelis who use remote electronic devices. The Post quoted Supreme National Security Council Secretary Ali Shamkhani speaking on state television, saying, quote, "Unfortunately, the operation was a very complicated operation, was carried out by using electronic devices. No individual was present at the site," close quote. The November 30th story added conflicting details. Quote, "On Sunday, Iran's semi-official Fars news agency said that Fakhrizadeh was wiped out by a machine gun operated by remote control, while the Arabic-language Al-Alam TV reported that the weapons used were controlled by satellite. A Reuters story offered the incredibly unlikely detail attributed to Press TV, quote, "The weapons collected from the site of the terrorist act bared the logo and specifications of the Israeli military industry," close quote. I think we can discount this one. Here's what can't be discounted. The CIA director under Barack Obama, John Brennan, wrote this weekend, quote, "This was a criminal act and highly reckless. It risks lethal retaliation and a new round of regional conflict. Iranian leaders would be wise to wait for the return of responsible American leadership on the global stage and to resist the urge to respond against perceived culprits," close quote. This regarding the killing of Mohsen Fakhrizadeh in Iran. Fakhrizadeh was Iran's top nuclear scientist. John Brennan said much the same, almost verbatim, earlier this year over the killing of Qasem Soleimani. Note carefully John Brennan's language. It is saying to the world and Iran that the U.S. is reckless, irresponsible, and that lethal retaliation is a potential and legal response. Quite incredible when you think about it. We don't have anyone yet claiming the killing, and already John Brennan is blaming the United States and broadcasting its illegality and granting the notion that a lethal response or retaliation would not be unexpected or unjustified. Thought experiment number 1. Can anyone recall anyone in history who served the top levels of government and blamed America for an attack on an enemy regime? Thought experiment number 2. Though highly unlikely, what would the response be from someone like John Brennan if the targeting of Fakhrizadeh was undertaken by Iranian dissidents? Thought experiment number 3. If the Iranian nuclear deal was so good, how come it could be avoided by the Iranians in such a short time period as for them to further enrich uranium and become a nuclear threat so quickly? Were we not told the deal was so good that Obama struck? because it prevented Iran from developing a nuclear weapon for 15 years? Follow the timeline that's just a little closer. Only 2 weeks ago, Iran began enriching uranium with advanced centrifuges it installed in an underground Natanz nuclear facility. This, according to an International Atomic Energy Agency, IAEA, report. The report states, quote, on 14 November 2020, the agency verified that Iran began feeding UF6, which is uranium hexafluoride, into the recently installed Cascade 174 IR2M centrifuges at the fuel enrichment plant in Natanz. Close quote. The report comes nearly a week after the IAEA's revelation that Iran had completed the transfer of the above Cascade from an above-ground plant to the underground facility at Natanz. All of this was impermissible. So, too, was the fact that the IAEA several times wanted to, interview Fakhrizadeh, and Iran's government never complied. In response to all of the above, the head of the IAEA, Rafael Grossi, stated publicly that Iran was not being credible. His words, credible. Now, do recall what former Secretary of State John Kerry said about the nuclear deal, as I think it is the most important part of the deal. We gave tens of billions of dollars to Iran to get them to sign off on the nuclear deal in 2015. A year later, on CNBC, John Kerry was asked if that money could be used to fund terrorism. Here's his exact answer, quote, John Kerry, quote, I think that some of it will end up in the hands of the IRGC or other entities, some of which are labeled terrorists. You know, to some degree. I'm not going to sit here and tell you that every component of that can be prevented, close quote. Good thing we weren't at war with terrorists or terrorism. Good thing we weren't funding them. But we were. And we were. And one wonders if John Brennan or anyone in the putative and prospective Biden administration thinks the same, or if they think the greater world danger is the United States headed by a Republican president. It is a little absurd that we have to keep reminding the antagonists against America in America about Iran every time they use that country as a wedge against the United States or a Republican president. Let me put it plainly. We are not the problem. Repression, religious fundamentalism, human rights depredation, and terrorism are the problem. And when they are all wrapped into one toxic bundle or veil, the problem is much the worse, despite so-called experts who keep saying we are not at war with Iran. They are right to a degree, but to a very chilling degree. Iran has been at war with us, we not with them. This is the country that created explosionary devices that killed over 600 Americans in Iraq. This is the country that aided Dr. Assad in killing hundreds of thousands of Syrians. This is the country that invaded Yemen and killed thousands there. This is the country that attacked a U.S. base in Kirkuk. This is a country that opens Parliament shouting death to the United States, death to America. For 40 years, they have declared war against the United States. It started by taking over the U.S. Embassy and holding 52 American hostages for 444 days. In two different bombings in 1983, they killed 260 Americans in Lebanon. In 1988, they bombed the USS Samuel Roberts. This is a country that still holds U.S. hostages. This is a country that tortured and killed Americans from William Buckley to Robert Stetham on television. And, of course, there was the bombing of U.S. servicemen at the Khobar Towers, killing 19 Americans. And for those of you who think they didn't work with al-Qaeda, every intelligence report says they did. Quote, in late 1991 or 92, as I am quoting from page 62 of the bipartisan 9/11 Commission report, quote, discussions in Sudan between al-Qaeda and Iran led to an informal agreement to cooperate in providing support, even if only training, for actions carried out primarily against Israel and the United States. Still quoting, not long afterwards, senior al-Qaeda operatives and trainers traveled to Iran to receive training in explosives. Still quoting, in the fall of 1993, another such delegation went to the Bekaa Valley in Lebanon for further training in explosives, as well as in intelligence and security. Still quoting, bin Laden reportedly showed particular interests in learning how to use truck bombs, such as the one that killed over 200 Marines in Lebanon in 1983. The relationship between al-Qaeda and Iran, still quoting, demonstrated that Sunni Shia divisions did not pose an insurmountable barrier to cooperation in terrorist operations. As will be described in Chapter 7, the report writes, al-Qaeda contacts with Iran continued in ensuing years. Close quote. If you want to know you're in the presence of someone who doesn't know what they're talking about, listen for them to say Iran is Shiite and doesn't work with Sunnis. It's false. Ask yourself why Iran funds Hamas, a Sunni organization. Or shall we go to that Chapter 7 of the 9/11 Commission report? How about this? Quote, intelligence indicates the persistence of contacts between Iranian security officials and senior al-Qaeda figures after bin Laden's return to Afghanistan. Khalid, who masterminded the bombing of the USS Cole, has said that Iran made a concerted effort to strengthen relations with al-Qaeda after the October 2000 attack on the USS Cole. Khalid and other detainees have described the willingness of Iranian officials to facilitate the travel of al-Qaeda members through Iran on their way to and from Afghanistan. For example, Iranian border inspectors would be told not to place telltale stamps in the passports of these travelers. Such arrangements were particularly beneficial to al-Qaeda. Close quote. The report goes on. So does the writing of Lawrence Wright in the Looming Tower. So does the Senate Intelligence Committee report. Of course, few talk about the Iran plot to set off a bomb in Georgetown, Washington, D.C. in December of 2011. But it's there, and you can research it. Can you imagine if that was not thwarted? Thank God it was. By the way, do you know whose idea that bombing was? Qasem Soleimani. The only thing that was reported rightly by the mainstream media today, was we don't know how Iran will react. We don't. But the idea they will take up arms has it backwards. They've been doing that for more than 40 years. We've been the ones not at war. Now, one of the reasons I asked for thought experiment number 2 above as to what John Brennan and others would be saying if it were actually Iranian dissidents who killed Dr. Fakhrizadeh, I asked because there was such a movement, and it was crushed in 2009 with the help of President Barack Obama, who gave the green light to Iran to crush it, saying, quote, we would not meddle in Iranian affairs, even as he had no problem meddling with allies, helping to topple the leadership of Egypt, turning Libya into Swiss cheese, and, of course, lecturing Israel on its border policy. The thought experiment, in other words, is an impossibility because thanks to Barack Obama and Joe Biden, Iran liquidated its internal democratic opposition. Why so much time on this? Because the world is still a dangerous place, and despite media and Democratic Party claims that Donald Trump isolated America and her allies, the truth is just the opposite. Nobody spoke of Barack Obama and Joe Biden isolating our allies, though that's exactly what they did in what used to be known as Eastern Europe and the Middle East. Does anyone remember the sweat we caused the consciences of Europe, from Lech Walesa to Václav Havel, who wrote an open letter to the United States when Barack Obama was president? Here is some of that letter they signed. Quote, 20 years after the end of the Cold War, however, we see that Central and Eastern Europe countries are no longer at the heart of American foreign policy. As the Obama administration sets its priorities, our region is one part of the world that Americans have largely stopped worrying about. They went on in their letter to criticize that lack of worrying and the effort to reset relations with Russia at the expense of helping formerly Eastern European countries, which included the dismantling of missile defense in Europe that would have protected their countries in order to appease Russia. Today, nobody recalls any of that because the Democrats turned about on Russia in order to allege that it helped Donald Trump win his 2016 election. But make no mistake about it, foreign policy under Obama was pro-Russia, and so much so, it dismantled ours and Europe's missile defense there, and even waged rhetorical war against Republicans who warned that appeasing Russia was a bad idea. Recall when Mitt Romney said that in debating Barack Obama in 2012, and Obama quipped, the 1980s are calling, Mitt, asking for their foreign policy back. Well, today, the 2009s, 2010s, 2011s, 2012s, 2013s, 2014s, and 2015s are calling and asking for their foreign policy back. And I don't think it will be a good thing when that phone is answered. I know most talk about this past election was about domestic policy and issues. After all, the foreign policy problems were hard to criticize. That gives you some idea of the success of the Donald Trump presidency. Not much to criticize there on the foreign policy front. But watch him. Kerry is back, and Biden is back, and so are so many others of the architects of their failure. America may feel wobbly here at home. It looks to look even more wobbly abroad. I'm Seth Leibson. We'll be right back.